Alrighty. So thank you all for joining me. The beginning of this is just an introduction to me and who I am. So any others that join us won't be missing too much. But we'll go to this. So my name is Dandy Ward. I've obviously gotten a haircut since this picture was taken. So I am a chronic illness management coach. So I work with histamine-based conditions, dysautonomia, POTS, EDS, that kind of spectrum, as well as a neurodivergence coach. I work mostly with autism and ADHD. The two are very tied together throughout this series. If you all, come to all of them, you'll see very clearly why they're connected. We have a lot of really amazing research on how the biochemistry connects neurodivergence and the kind of dysautonomia spectrum. I'm currently, so I have my NBCHWC, which is my nationally certified coaching certificate. So just to give a difference, because I'm vain, there's a lot of people online who use the term health coach. I don't use the term health coach because of that. NBCHWC is the only nationally recognized program that you can go through actual psychology-based coursework, and it's a year long and you have hours and all that stuff. And so just if you're looking for coaches, whether it's me or anyone in the future, I would look for the NBCHWC over some of the other ones that don't have as much rigorous oversight and don't have ethical codes. So the basis of what I do, my undergrad is in nutrition science with a concentration in wellness and biochemistry. And in my practice, I do 3 different categories of care. So the first one is enzyme correction therapies. This is through vitamin and nutrient replacements, but altered versions of vitamin and nutrients to help the body rebalance certain enzymes that are required for both immune protocol and mental protocols. And we'll get into that as we go through this. The second part is lifestyle management. This is sleep rehabilitation. There we go. Dietary protocols, as well as kind of the mental health aspect of things, and very much therapy adjacent coaching. And then the final one is neuro reprogramming, which neuro reprogramming works with neuroplasticity principles. This is where the CNS or the limbic system comes into play. I work with clients to help reprogram parts of their limbic system that are permanently turned on. That's what we're going to be talking about and starting out with today. So, okay, we're going to jump into what is dysautonomia. For many of you, this is going to be a review again, but breaking down the word, dys means dysfunction. Autonomia refers to your autonomic nervous system. It's an umbrella term that covers a whole bunch of conditions, right? So narcolepsy is under there. I think a lot of people don't realize that. POTS is definitely under there. EDS is not technically in itself a dysautonomia, but it is highly, highly tied to dysautonomia, because the second you have that much connective tissue going wrong, dysautonomia happens. And we're going to talk about that throughout this presentation. There's a lot of symptoms. Also, MCAS is in there, and all of the histamine-based ones. So that includes migraine. That includes a lot of skin stuff. So any of that can fall under the kind of dysautonomia umbrella. Gastrointestinal issues, IBS, can fall under the dysautonomia umbrella. General fatigue, chronic fatigue, all of those fall under it. So doctors for years called dysautonomia every color of the rainbow except dysautonomia, because they didn't really understand it. We're finally getting an understanding. It started in the functional space and then got into the research space, and now it's finally trickling into Western medicine. Most doctors still don't have enough training on it to be able to A, recognize it on site, and B, know what to do about it at all. But there are those, and it's a growing field of doctors who are treating it well. They're just hard to find. So continuing on this, when we say autonomic nervous system, this is the ANS, your autonomic nervous system regulates all of your organs and all of your non-conscious processes in your body, right? So we're talking your heart rate, your digestion, your breathing. It has 2 components. You have your sympathetic and parasympathetic. So sympathetic is your fight or flight systems. It's your active, I'm running from a tiger systems. Parasympathetic is your rest and digest. So most of the symptoms of dysautonomia are directly related to an overactivation of your sympathetic nervous system. And that's, again, what we're going to be talking about today and what we can do about it. All right, limbic system overview. So you don't necessarily need this information, but I find it's helpful for people to really understand how the systems connect. So the four big ones we're going to talk about, first you have your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus is your hormonal control center for your whole body, right? It manages mood, hunger, thirst, sexual arousal, blood pressure, body temperature, heart rate, and many, many, many more things. Next, you have your amygdala. Amygdala is your emotional center. It specifically is associated with emotions like anxiety, anger, and fear. But it also has a lot to do with memory and social interpretation. And that's really important. So this part of your brain that's cued in to the more negative emotions is also cued into how you respond emotionally to situations in your life. The third one is the thalamus. The thalamus I want you to think of as a dial, right? So if you're like on your stereo in your car and you turn up that dial and the music gets louder. So the thalamus does this for the brain, but specifically with processing sensory information. So we're going to talk about this later, but during fight or flight, that thalamus turns that dial up and all of your senses get sharper and stronger, and there's way more information coming in. And then it's supposed to dial it back down when you enter rest and digest, and when it doesn't, that causes problems. The last one we're going to talk about is your hippocampus. Your hippocampus is responsible for memory formation. It's really important to note that memory formation is tied in directly into these systems. What this means is that as we're forming memories, this learning process, survival process in our brain is analyzing each of these memories and determining how active it needs to be based on its sensory input. This is where the mind-body connection gets really important, because the way your brain interprets information dictates how it's going to respond to information in the future. So your limbic system role, the limbic system is often known as your lizard brain, right? It is a survival system. It analyzes everything that happens around you and decides whether it's good or bad, or safe or harmful is a better way to say that. It's the control unit of your autonomic nervous system. And again, that autonomic nervous system controls so many body functions. It's a behavior engine, though. That's the big point, is it learns to react and change to stimuli over time based on repeating patterns. These patterns can be external. They can be the social patterns you're engaging with. They can also be internal patterns. So you have something called interoception, where your body can sense itself on the inside. And if there are continuous disruptions from the inside going on, it will also activate the limbic system as a danger response. And this is what ties a lot of, especially when you bring in Ehlers-Danlos and a lot of the other conditions in, there's a loop, right? So chronic fight or flight can trigger a lot of these symptoms. A lot of these symptoms being present in the body will continuously trigger fight or flight. And when we're looking at that, you have to kind of disrupt the wheel in order to create change here. Fight or flight response. I say this all the time, running from the tiger. So the purpose of your fight or flight response is as a survival system. And it's supposed to be a short-term response. So your body sends a signal, and we'll talk about how that happens, when you're in fight or flight, that slows down a lot of body functions that aren't needed when you're running from a tiger. So your digestion is slowed. Kidney and liver function is slowed a little bit. Your blood vessels expand. Your breathing increases, your blood oxygen increases, your senses get stronger. And so in the short term, this is great. It helps us survive. A long-term partial activation, what we're about to see is that it causes a lot of problems that you'll all probably be very familiar with. All right. So we're going to get into this. What you see in red is the long-term symptom. What you see in black is the fight or flight response. So the first one is increased heart rate and blood pressure. So when you're running from a tiger, your heart beats faster to pump more blood and oxygen into your muscles, right? So if this effect goes on too long, you're looking at hypertension, you're looking at high blood pressure, you're looking at, a lot of things. You can get headaches from this, you can get quite a lot. It can also be fatigue because the added energy of your heart beating faster and these systems being active will lead to fatigue. Faster breathing. So the big thing about faster breathing, oxygen is an inflammatory agent, which is why we have antioxidants in our body. Antioxidants, think vitamin C or glutathione or that kind of stuff. So when you have higher oxygen in your body on a more permanent basis, you're going to get more inflammation, which is going to lead to more problems. Bronchodilation. The airways in your lungs open up to allow for greater airflow and oxygen intake. Well, in the short term, that's great. In the long term, this means more stress on your lungs, more issues regulating blood oxygen levels. It can lead to breathing problems. It can lead to all sorts of things because the stress of your lungs basically holding themselves open is not supposed to happen. It can also lead to higher irritation of the lungs. Sensory and cognitive changes. So we have pupil dilation. Your pupils are enlarged to let more light in, improving vision and awareness. Well, if this gets stuck on, your brain only has energy to process so many senses at once. Fight or flight causes heightened alertness and senses anyway. That dial being turned up means your brain is working harder to process more sensory information at once. This means light sensitivity. This means sound sensitivity. This means touch sensitivity. Over time, your brain runs through its stores of natural energy faster. This is where a lot of brain fog comes from. Migraines are a complicated thing. We'll get into that. Migraines are a histamine-induced process where histamines are vasodilating your blood vessels in your brain and they start spasming. Between fight or flight system holding them open and then conflicting hormones trying to hold them open and closed, you get migraines, as well as increased electrical activity in the brain and quite a few other things. But this dial being turned up for too long causes a lot of the symptoms we see in dysautonomia related to, hyperactive sensory input, sensory overload, brain fog, and general fatigue. Okay, metabolic changes, glucose release. So the liver stores glucose into the bloodstream at a higher rate. This results in blood sugar dysregulation. Eventually, in the long term, this can lead to prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, along with other factors. But even when it's not that extreme, blood sugar dysregulation disrupts your cortisol cycle and is disrupted by your cortisol cycle because how the body controls blood sugar is in a large part from cortisol. And it also, much like increased oxygen, creates inflammation in the body, but it's a generalized inflammation. Now, the thing about both increased glucose release and higher blood oxygen levels is that doctors aren't going to run tests and be like, oh, look, you have these definable causes. They're going to look at your blood work and say, everything's fine. I don't understand why you have all this inflammation. And that's really frustrating because they're doing their best with what they're trained on. These things don't show up well in markers because they're natural systems that are just a little bit heightened. The last one we're going to talk about is hormone release. Adrenaline and cortisol. So adrenaline and cortisol are involved in blood sugar regulation. The other thing they do that's really big is circadian rhythm. So your circadian rhythm is a process that happens in all of the cells of your body. It's not a brain process. It's a total body process. It is controlled by a bunch of hormones, but cortisol and adrenaline are two big ones. There's a bunch of other ones. Histamine's in there and a bunch of other ones are in there. There's a natural pattern that I'll explain at the end if you would like me to, of what happens with your cortisol throughout the day and the night to give you a healthy circadian rhythm. Having a permanently on fight or flight response disrupts the circadian rhythm, which means you're either having trouble going to bed, having trouble staying asleep, or getting worse sleep than you should be, leaving you more tired during the day and weakening your immune system and your mental responses over time. Okay, other physical changes. Blood flow redirection. Blood is moved from non-essential areas like the digestive system to the muscles. So what happens when your digestive system doesn't have enough blood? Your peristalsis, how your food moves through you, slows down. But also, if your blood is being moved out of organs into your muscles are in your extremities. We're talking arms and legs. What that results in is POTS. A chronically on fight or flight system is directly tied to POTS activation. because the muscles in your arms and legs are vasodilated, meaning open, so blood pools. And then your heart has a really hard time regulating when you stand up or sit down because of the way that your fight or flight system is directing your body to direct blood flow. Again, in the short term, this isn't as big a deal. In the long term, it becomes a very big problem and you get POTS symptoms out of it. Now, I am not saying this is the only cause of POTS. There are some physical causes of POTS. You can get damage to certain blood vessels. You can get quite a lot of things. But this is one of the most common factors in POTS manifestations. So other things we're going to talk about, dysregulated homeostasis, including liver functions. When you get dysregulated liver, you're looking at dysregulated vitamin conversions. Like, oh, I'm chronically vitamin D deficient, even though I take vitamin D. Your cholesterol is managed by your liver. And we'll go into that later if you'd like as well. It also, your kidneys, if your kidneys aren't functioning properly, you're going to have trouble processing sodium and mineral compositions at the right rate. That also ties into POTS. So your pancreas is digestion and blood sugar regulation, and then reproductive organs. This is a really big one. So one of the things we see in dysautonomia and some of the cofactors are things like PMDD, PCOS. Those are all histamine influenced conditions. They are also directly tied to your organs having altered function from a permanently on fight or flight system. The next one is sweating. So sweat glands become stimulated, leading to too much sweating. This means loss of sodium and minerals. It means loss of fluids. It's also tied to POTS. It's also tied to a bunch of other things. Muscle readiness. This is a big one. Your muscles become tense. When you're in fight or flight, your body tenses and preps your muscles for action. In the short term, this is great. It means you can run from the tiger. In the long term, it means you are more likely to get knots and pain in your muscles. It puts more pressure on your muscular nerves that can lead to nerve pain. And then it's putting more pressure on your bones and tendons, leading to a lot of different pain and discomfort in your bones and tendons, and even arthritis type stuff. Now, arthritis is its own condition. It is not necessarily associated, but feeling really creaky, feeling, stiff in the morning, all of those can be attached to your muscles staying in ready state for too long. The last one is inhibition of digestion. We've talked about this a little bit, but your fight or flight system slows down your digestive tract. It slows down the rate by food can flow through it. This leads to constipation. This can also lead to dysregulation in a way that can also cause diarrhea, which is confusing, but it can cause both. Any process in your body that the body wants to conserve energy from, it's slowing down. This is where you get IBS symptoms, loss of appetite, late night cravings, sugar cravings. And then the other thing that happens is your body starts prioritizing glycogens, and it goes against glycogen storage, which is a form of sugar storage, into fat storage. What this means is that you're more likely to put on weight if you're in chronic fight or flight. Okay. Someone real quick, am I talking too fast?
No.
Great. So we're going to look at the vagus nerve. I promise this connects. I know it feels like a jump. So your vagus nerve is the largest nerve in your body. It directly connects to your limbic system, and then it goes down through the sides of your neck and connects to all of the organs in your body. It is how the limbic system turns on and off your organs through the fight or flight or sympathetic parasympathetic mechanism. There have been a lot of theories and a lot of things said about the vagus nerve. We get polyvagal theory, which isn't quite correct, that surmise that there were two independent parts of the vagus nerve. The current kind of science on it shows that the vagus nerve is more like an on-off switch. It doesn't actually have an off mode. If it went all the way off, you would die. Your heart would stop. You'd stop breathing because it controls those things. But it's more like a dimmer switch that when you're in rest and digest, when you're in that parasympathetic, it's all the way on, and it's sending signals to your organs of function as you should, move things through, we're safe, we're in rest and digest. That's the healthy on mode, active mode of the vagus nerve. And then it has its low power mode, in which it's not sending those signals to those organs, except it's sending signals to the heart and the lungs to speed up. So in that case, your vagus nerve is in its lower energy and it's sending different signals. So when it's on, it slows down heart, it slows down lungs, it activates your organs. When it's off, your heart rate shoots up, your breath rate shoots up, everything else slows down. This is really important because the vagus nerve is one of the ways that we really have a mind-body connection in a solid way. And it's something that we have direct control over. The vagus nerve is one of the few nerves that controls things that are both conscious and unconscious. So the unconscious we've gone over, heart rate, breathing, all that stuff. But also in conscious, you have your diaphragm, you have most of the muscles in your throat are all controlled by the vagus nerve, as well as some of the muscles, your facial nerves control your facial muscles, but through your neck, the muscles you use for your voice, all of those are governed in part by the vagus nerve. This is really important because it means we can modulate the vagus nerve by activating purposefully muscles that connect to both. We'll get to that in like treatment stuff. All right, limbic dysfunction. This is what we've kind of been talking about this whole time, but I wanted to define it in a real way. So because the limbic system is an internal safety mechanism and an emotional response center, physical and emotional events can trigger a fight or flight response. Continuous or extreme events can trigger a stronger and more frequent fight or flight episodes. This is what I was talking about before. During fight or flight, the vagus nerve is downregulated, turned off. As this happens more and more often, the vagus nerve can get stuck in this off position, leading to chronic fight or flight modifications. What this means is your limbic system might be calmed down. It might be like things are fine, but your vagus nerve has been turned down so much that it doesn't want to turn back on. And so you still have the same symptoms even when your brain is saying like, we're good. Now there's also the opposite where your brain just gets stuck in this like something's always wrong state. So there are two systems that we look at. Luckily, when you modulate the vagus nerve, it also modulates the limbic system. So let's look at some ways that the fight or flight system gets set off. This is really important. So these are internal causes. Hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. If your blood sugar drops too low, it can trigger a CNS response. Increased heart rate. If your heart rate increases for other reasons, so excess movement, fright, that can trigger fight or flight responses, which then double back and re-increases it. This is why in panic attacks, you start having a fast heart rate, you notice it, and then it gets way worse. Blood pressure fluctuations. So in POTS, you stand up and your blood sugar goes crazy, or blood pressure goes crazy. This is going to activate your CNS systems. Systemic infections and inflammation can activate your fight or flight system. Chronic stress and anxiety disorders. And then the last one, which is not on here, is nutritional deficiencies. Long-term nutritional deficiencies will activate your fight or flight systems, at least partially. So looking at all of these, the important thing to note is that it's not just emotional stressors that will trigger a fight or flight response. There's internal stuff that does it too. And it's part of what ties in a lot of the chronic health conditions that this group discusses and the limbic system. And, you know, I'm hoping y'all are seeing how they're weaving together. So the other thing to note in a lot of especially autoimmune disease, but in a lot of chronic illness in general, there's an event that happens, the kind of birth of that chronic illness spot in the body. And it happens when long-term emotional stress meets a viral or physical exposure. So in a lot of people and in quite a large percentage of autoimmune conditions, that virus is Epstein-Barr virus. Some people get Epstein-Barr, which is mono, and they don't really have effects. Some people get mono and they get an autoimmune disease. And one of the things that we're seeing is that one of the big differences is in stress levels, because when the CNS is already primed by high stress and then a virus enters the body that has devastating, full body effects, you get this perfect storm that creates a cycle. And it's that cycle that generates chronic illness. Co-conditions. Okay, acute stress and anxiety disorder. are chicken and the eggs, as well as ADHD and autism, which we'll talk about separately. But a lot of anxiety disorder can be kind of explained by a chronic, fight or flight system that's on. It can also be caused by chemical imbalances. So there's a chicken and the egg of, did the anxiety trigger long-term fight or flight? Did fight or flight long-term trigger an anxiety disorder? Then you have ADHD and ASD, autism spectrum disorder. So both of these, we have the brain scans and we have the research now showing A, physiological change in the brain. B, we're showing differences in the way neurons form in both of these. C, the research has already shown that in both of these, a lot of the symptoms come from a permanently semi-on state of the limbic system. I can post a lot of that research in it. I was supposed to have a slide with it, and I don't know what happened to it. So there's a lot of research that I will show, in the group at request, because I don't say anything without backing it up with research, just so y'all know. But the current science of both ADHD and autism shows that a chronic on state of this limbic system result is kind of involved in a lot of the processes, especially the dysfunctional processes in both conditions. The other co-conditions, insomnia, post-traumatic stress disorder, and certain substances are all involved in this chronic activation. They're not necessarily required. So what are the implications? Okay. So I'm weaving together a picture for y'all that I'm hoping is as clear to y'all as it was to me the first time I came across a lot of this information. And that's, we can collect diagnoses all day, and a lot of us often do. And when asked why this is happening, doctors go, well, it just happens, I don't know. But we have a whole lot of research that shows this. And when we go back here and here and here, and what we're seeing is that there's a direct correlation between all the things that happens in fight or flight and all of the long-term symptoms of dysautonomia. So the big implications of this are working on the limbic activation and working to calm down the fight or flight response and increase the activation of your vagus nerve can decrease symptoms of dysautonomia. So this is something I started working with in my practice several years ago, and I've seen really dramatic results in people. It doesn't necessarily fix everything. There's other factors involved, again, because it's a loop. There are all these categories on the loop. But vagus nerve and fight or flight activations is one of the easiest entry points we can get into to start modulating. Now, once you start modulating that, you have to start fixing the issues that long-term fight or flight causes as well. This looks like certain types of nutritional deficiencies. This looks like certain habits that have malformed around sleep and eating and exercise and all sorts of other stuff because of chronic fight or flight. 1 second. So again, I'll say this 1,000 times, limbic dysfunction is not solely responsible for dysautonomia, and that is not what I'm trying to say. That is an irresponsible position that a lot of other people online, once they've run into this information, have started saying. Anytime an influencer starts telling you they have the sole reason for a condition, unless they're talking about a virus, like COVID is the sole source of COVID, right? Any of these chronic illnesses are going to be multifactorial illnesses. What we're trying to do is find as many of those factors and address them at the same time as we can, because that's the only way to get the full system to calm down. So the vicious cycle. I mentioned this before. So you have physical plus emotional stress triggers fight or flight hyperarousal. That's what we call it when it gets stuck. Fight or flight disrupts internal regulation over time. Prolonged disruption leads to development of dysautonomia. Dysautonomia causes physical and emotional stress. And it's a loop again and again. So there are many points in this loop that we can dive into for treatment. The biggest and easiest one is through vagus nerve activation. And then, as I said before, there are other points that you work with alongside that. So going back to ADHD and autism. So we have increased fight or flight sensitivity and has been documented in both ADHD and autism. That means neurodivergence greatly increases the likelihood of developing hyperarousal and thereby way more likelihood to develop dysautonomia. So part of the reason I coach both chronic illness and dysautonomia is the Venn diagram of the clients I have that have chronic illness and the Venn diagram of clients I have that are neurodivergent is almost a circle. There's some slivers on the outside, but it's almost a circle. Especially, I have many clients who come and they have chronic illness and they're like, I'm not neurodivergent. And then we have a few sessions and I'm like, why don't we send you to get checked out for some neurodivergence? And then they come back and they're like, you'll never believe it. And I'm like, I would. So there's a huge, again, you can get chronic illness without neurodivergence. You can get neurodivergence without chronic illness. But the big thing is that having ADHD or autism or both makes your system hypersensitive to limbic system activations, which means you are way more likely to end up getting these type of chronic illnesses. How do we fix it? Okay. So the first is vagus nerve stabilization. There are a few ways to do this. I'll go over a couple of them with you. The gold standard is electrostimulation. That sounds really scary. It is not a medical treatment. There's a bunch of devices on the market that do this. My favorite is called the Pulsetto, Pulsetto. They're not super cheap. I got really dramatic relief from them. I didn't say this at the beginning and I meant to, I'm a dysautonomia person myself. I am a narcoleptic. I have MCAS. I have migraines. I have quite a lot of the different symptoms. As well as, there's a lot to it. And I've been able to help myself get back to a place of, I'd say, mostly functionality. There's no, I think, 100% kicking it because once you're hyperactive, it's easy to get reactivated. But I've been able to reclaim a lot of my life through doing a variety of therapies. And that's why I got into this work, because it started with fixing me and then moved from fixing me to turning around and using the degrees and the knowledge and the research and the training to help others with it. So I use a Pulsetto device. I use it twice a day. I haven't been using it recently because I lend it out to other people that are like, I want to try it before I buy it. The below electrical stimulation, you have vagal activation. So there's a bunch of ways to do this. Ice packs can do it. Humming and gargling techniques, certain type of breath work, certain types of meditation techniques that are meant to directly stimulate the vagus nerve itself. So these aren't necessarily like psychological techniques, they're physical techniques that force your vagus nerve to turn on. When it turns on, it sends the signal to your organs. It also sends a signal to your limbic system that it needs to calm down. So those are the two big ways that we do vagus nerve stimulation. The easiest ones are breath work and humming and even gargling. Gargling actually requires more muscles than almost anything else that the vagus nerve controls. It's a great way if you're having a panic attack, if you're feeling really gross, gargle ice cold water for like 30, 45 seconds and then check in with yourself and you'll notice you feel better. And that's because it's a vagal activation, a really nice one. The other one's putting an ice pack on your chest or on your neck, or I'll have like smooth rocks or marbles that I'll keep in the freezer and I'll run them down the sides of my neck up and down. So these do activate the vagus nerve. They do help retrain it. On their own, they're not sufficient to fix the problem. Even the electrical stimulation, while it's the most helpful and the most direct, does not on its own all the way fix the problem. But it helps strengthen that vagal connection that allows the repair work to start. So the next step is physical stress management therapies. So physical stress management therapies means starting to replace and correct biochemical deficiencies in the body. We're looking at making sure magnesium, potassium, vitamin D, vitamin B12, folate, a lot of the various vitamins and minerals you need in your body to function are at their appropriate levels. They've most of the time gotten way out of whack because the organs that are responsible for converting them are not converting them at the rate they should be. So it's why it's one of the first things we do is we look at, what can we start getting back to healthy levels to make sure that there's not physical internal causes sending stress responses back up the chain. The next one is psychological stress management therapies. So this is where that neuro programming work comes in, where you start doing internal dialogue work, you start doing personalization work, you start doing mantra work, where it's all about retraining the brain out of anxious behavioral patterns into, stable systemic patterns. This is what CBT does a lot of the time. Supplementation is much like physical stress. It's just focused on the supplements. Physical stress management therapies can also include making sure we're not stressing the body out. And the last one is life support systems to prevent reoccurrence. So what this looks like is community activations, much like what Spoons of Salt is doing in our community right now. It looks like fixing dysregulated sleep patterns, dysregulated eating patterns. The comorbidity or the likelihood occurrence of disordered eating in dysautonomia is really, really high. And when we're looking to correct and reduce symptoms, it's really important that we are able to start reintegrating healthy eating patterns back in. The way we eat controls a lot of how our body feels safe. And when we don't feel safe eating, our body just doesn't feel safe. So all of these together are a lot of work. They're a whole process. And so I think, there are takeaways here that I will be increasingly giving information in this group on how to do some of these. In order to do all of them, it's a personal approach. It's a person-to-person approach in which it requires assessment and activation of a lot of these processes and putting things in order and helping manage. And we'll get to that at the end. Vagal stimulation practices. This is what I was talking about a minute ago because I love to jump ahead, apparently. So electrostimulation, we talked about. Vagal strengthening, we talked about. This is breath work, temperature therapies, pharyngeal exercises. That's the gargling or the humming. Grounding practices. So grounding practices include mind-body connection strengthening work. I will probably be hosting a mind-body workshop very soon. My favorite one is a body gratitude exercise in which we do use micro movements mixed with gratitude practices to help you get back in touch with the actual parts of your body and increase your interoception. But combining it with grace and acceptance for your body to create, in dysautonomia a lot, it's easy to get mad at our own bodies. It's easy to hate how wrong things are. And part of recreating feelings of safety that turns off the fight or flight system is doing exercises in which you have gratitude and restores love and grace for the body that we have. And they're very, very effective. They take practice, but the more we can increase that mind-body connection, the easier it is to do the work. So while anyone can practice vagal stimulation, it is recommended to work with a practitioner familiar with the practice for ideal results. I can give you all a bunch of exercises. Y'all can practice a bunch of exercises. You'll start seeing big results. Working with someone, and as much as this is a pitch for me because this is what I do, there are yoga instructors, there are physical therapists, there are occupational therapists, there are spiritual leaders that all do some kind of vagal stimulation. And finding someone who has experience with it will just help you in the process faster and better and safer. All right, physical stress management therapies. So creating stress identification cues. This one's really important. So one of the things that happens in chronic fight or flight is that we have so many signals coming from our brain that are stress signals that we stop paying attention to when a stress signal's starting, which means it can be hours or days later, beyond the initial signal, that you realize, oh, I was triggered, something happened. And so one of the things that we can do is we start a practice that allows you to quickly identify what caused this stress trigger. So what that looks like is strengthening that interoception and feeling, oh, my heart rate upticked, my temperature just got wacky, I'm sweating more, and being like, having your brain say, you know what, that's a physical symptom that something is wrong and I should check in with myself. And again, when you have so many of these, it's easy to not pay attention to them. But once we start being able to re-identify them, that's essential in doing the work to reprogram brain responses to physical stimuli. Neuroplastic retraining, this is a mixture of, you can do it with physical movement work, you can do it with mantra or vocal work. The whole purpose of it is to redirect how the brain is directing information. That is a whole field of psychology and therapy that's really wonderful, and we've made really great headway on in the past several years. Gentle movement practices. These are also really important. So movement is one of the ways our body sends signals to itself, especially in our connective tissue. One of the other things we've learned through science in the past few years, that our connective tissue does communicate and send signals. It can only do that through movement. So much like our nervous system, our connective tissue is a communication system, but it can only send those signals when it's moving. This is especially true in like your spinal discs, which get all of their blood flow and all of their nutrients through compression, through movement, which means lack of movement causes deterioration in your spine just because it's not getting enough movement to pump the blood. So, because they don't have active blood vessels going through them, they squish and they unsquish, and it moves all the nutrients and oxygen. With gentle movement, this can look like yoga, this can look like gentle dance, this can look like walking, it can look like gentle swimming. My favorite practice, and I encourage you to try this because it's amazing, I call it ostrich Tai Chi. You get a tube sock and you put an ostrich face on it. And then you're an ostrich and you practice gentle movements being an ostrich. And it's kind of a theater exercise mixed with gentle movement, but you'll find yourself slowly moving being an ostrich. You can do it as a giraffe or whatever. But it's a great way to get in touch with your body and add a bunch of joy into movement practice. It's very silly. You will laugh a lot, especially someone walks in on you on it. It's ridiculous. The best one is you get a whole room full of people wearing tube socks being ostriches with each other. And everyone's giggling and everyone's moving, and it's delightful. And so it's a way to start getting your body in movement and having it feel safe and joyful, because that's one of the other techniques that we'll talk about probably in one of the future seminars. Is one of the most powerful things we can do to turn off fight or flight systems is laugh and have joy. The part of the brain that experiences joy cannot be active at the same time as the part of the brain that experiences fight or flight. They are mutually exclusive. So having moments where you generate joy helps calm down and turn off that fight or flight system, because joy is a safety thing and fight or flight is not. So they can't exist together. Finding and dealing with active triggers is our next category. So this means finding food sensitivities, finding allergens, checking your house for mold. Mold is a huge activator of limbic system. It's a huge activator of the limbic system. It's a subtle and insidious activator of the system. So those are your active triggers, and there's a lot of them, and that's where, again, working with a professional that has experience, you can do it on your own. There are ways there are videos online, you can find ways to start identifying triggers. It is really helpful to work with somebody. The last one we're going to talk about is sleep rehabilitation. Sleep is one of the most important regulatory processes in our body. When we are not sleeping correctly, and by that I mean moving through the stages of sleep, getting enough of each stage of sleep, it starts messing with a bunch of brain systems. It messes with cognition, alertness, neurochemical levels. It depletes your brain's battery, basically. And it is so much harder to do programming work with sleep fully messed up. Yeah, you can have some sleep issues and fully do reprogramming, but the better we can get sleep, which is where sleep rehabilitation comes in, the easier this process gets. Okay, psychological stress, management. Modulating internal dialogue. Your brain is not one monologue. Your brain is continuously having a conversation. We don't often pay attention to what that conversation looks like. There are several techniques that help give different parts of the conversation happening that creates your mental dialogue definition, allowing you to moderate or talk back to your brain's conversation to get different results. Increasing positive self-talk. We have so much research now showing a connection between positive versus negative self-talk and the brain's stress responses. Positive self-talk does not mean toxic positivity. It does not mean pretending everything's okay. It does not mean avoiding emotions. Positive self-talk means, expecting good things versus expecting bad things. Or it can look like, believing in yourself even when things are hard. There's a lot of things it can look like, but it's a language model in the brain where, the brain either veers towards, I can do this, or this isn't worth doing. And a lot of times in dysautonomia, because of the struggles we face, our brains fall into negative self-talk patterns more often than positive self-talk. And it makes everything harder. The next one is mantra work. So mantras are, if you have experience with the term, it's probably in the spiritual context of, Om or any of those. A mantra in scientific terms is a simple word, sound, or key phrase that you repeat over and over and over and over and over during a meditative practice throughout your day. And what it does is it forms a touchstone for your brain. It helps your brain calm down. Repetitive phrases or sounds, or it can be something like your favorite song will do it. You'll notice physiological changes. Smells. Smells can form mantras in a way of, you get home, you light your favorite candle or have your favorite scent of something, and it calms you down. And that's because it's a repeated key in your memory that triggers a result. You can also have negative mantras, repeated signals in your brain that signal something's wrong. So mantra work is all about finding healthy mantras to use in the regulation process. Regressive talk therapy. So regressive talk therapy is traditional therapy where you're talking about the past, analyzing it, and then coming to conclusions to have it not affect the future. I think regressive talk therapy is a very powerful tool. I don't think it's the only tool. I think there's also proactive therapies. That's what coaching is, where instead of looking at the past, we're starting in the present and just building habits going forward that are based in psychology, that are based in a lot of things. But talking about the past is effective and I recommend it. And working with therapists, I recommend. I don't think it's the absolute starting point. I think you can start with proactive forms and go to the regressive talk therapies when you're ready for it. The last is resilience training. So resilience training means helping teach your brain the difference between discomfort and danger. And especially when the limbic system is activated, every discomfort becomes a danger signal. Resilience is the practice where your brain can get okay with things that are uncomfortable and not release danger signals for them. So this can look like, good example, temperature. Okay, so temperature regulation, you get home and it's slightly hotter than you want it to be, and your brain has a meltdown about it. Resilience training does not mean we don't turn down the temperature and get comfy. Resilience training means before we turn down the temperature, we start training our brain, hey, I'm happy you alerted me that we were uncomfortable, but you could have alerted me gently. And instead you threw a chair across the room in my brain. And so resilience training looks like helping dial down the language your brain is using to what we consider like rational levels per the stimulus. So other ones may be emotional resilience training where, you have a friend who communicates something that sets you off. And that thing might have been fairly harmless, but you perceived it in a way maybe they didn't mean, or maybe you did perceive it in a way they meant, but it caused a strong reaction even though they didn't mean it in that way. So in resilience training, we reprogram some of what's happening so that those responses don't happen. Okay, supplementation therapies. What time is it? It's almost 8. I'm gonna hurry up. Rebalancing. So we've talked through all of this. Lifestyle modifications we've mostly talked through. Proper hydration is a really big one. Community as medicine and play as medicine are 2 that I really recommend. Isolation and low social index is one of the strongest markers against, like, having good community makes you live longer. When we look at blue zone data, which blue zones are areas where people live longer, the strongest factor is the strong community sense. The other one is play as medicine. This comes down to when you're feeling joy, the limbic system turns off. Play is powerful. Okay, why health coaching is essential for effective limbic retraining. I've kind of gone through this throughout the presentation, and this is a shameless plug on what I do. But there are 1,000 different steps in this process. And I'm going to, over the next several weeks as I'm doing these seminars, I'm going to be giving y'all as much information as I can. If y'all saw anything in here that resonated with you, if you were like, oh, I'm seeing how many of the symptoms I had he described with limbic system activation, I reach out, set up a free call. Let's at least talk about it. I'm not pushy. I'm not going to push you into sales or anything like that. But at least getting you started on the right foot of what the first steps look like can be really helpful. And so I'm just going to recommend that. I think, and this is my last slide. So from here, I want to thank you all for joining. I just talked at you for quite a long time. If you have any questions, please ask them.
I have one.
Yes.
Do you recommend wearables to track changes in nervous system response? And if so, which one is your preferred one?
I really like this question. I think there's a very fine line between tracking some helpful things and then getting obsessed with tracking everything. I think it can become a little dysfunctional when over tracking happens. So that being said, things like the Aura Ring and some of the more advanced trackers, while they can be helpful for collecting data, I think they can lead to obsessive behavior. My favorite is classics like the Apple Watch or the Fitbit or many of those. That being said, there are helpful apps that help you track your energy levels, that help you track your functionality levels, and they are really helpful in helping you manage chronic illness. As long as they're not having you check in every 5 minutes, that's when it gets dysfunctional. But for me, it's keeping a heart rate tracker and a sleep tracker and using those as major metrics. Heart rate, sleep, and temperature are the 3 that will give you the fastest data on something being wrong. And it's what most of these apps are using anyway to track how you're doing. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Of course. I think we had one in the comments. Can you speak more about cholesterol and dysautonomia? Yes, I absolutely can. This is from Sarah. Okay, so this is a fairly long topic. I'm going to try and condense it down because I've already gabbed at y'all for a long time. But how the purpose of cholesterol in the body, all of our cells, their cell walls are made up of cholesterols, right? As cells are being broken down and digested, cholesterol is released. Cholesterol is stored in part in the blood and in the liver. The liver takes cholesterol, turns cholesterol into bile. Bile is stored in the gallbladder. The gallstones and gallbladder issues are a trademark in dysautonomia patients. It's really common that I run into people who've had their gallbladder out because they developed gallstones because their bile wasn't moving at the right rate. So how your body in part gets rid of cholesterol is it pumps the bile into your small intestine when you eat food. That bile helps digest fats. As it moves through the system, there's a portion of it that you poop out. And then it absorbs up to 95% of the rest back in the body. Now, increased fiber is one of the biggest things. Fiber is a sponge. It absorbs some of that bile, and you end up pooping more of it out. When your digestive system is moving slower, the body has an opportunity to absorb more of that cholesterol. And then it's not cycling through cholesterol. It's not pulling cholesterol out of your blood to use in bile because it's absorbing more of it back in. And then you get higher and higher cholesterol because your body has a hard time processing it. Alongside that, your liver is what processes cholesterol. It's where cholesterol is formed and reformed and transferred. If the vagus nerve is turned off and your liver is not at optimal function and it's missing some of the vitamins and minerals and nutrients that are required for cholesterol management, you're going to end up with high cholesterol that even sometimes cholesterol that's hard to manage even with medications. So the direct link is the liver function and bile movement and digestive movement. Does that answer your question, Sarah? Yes. All right. Are there any other questions? I think that's it. All right. So the last thing I'm going to ask y'all then, was this helpful? Come off the mic and I want to hear, did these connections make sense? Did they help kind of explain how some of this is happening?
This was absolutely fantastic, and I cannot wait for the next series.
Yeah, so I believe the next one is going to be talking about, what did I say? Let's see. Here we go. The next one is histamine regulation. So I brought up histamines a lot in this presentation, but didn't actually talk about what's going on with histamines. So the next one, we're going to talk about what it means to have a histamine-induced condition and how the body gets histamine dysregulated. So this is the other piece of the puzzle that when I talk about enzyme corrections, how histamines in our food are absorbed and the enzyme DAO and what it does and how MCAS forms and all of that. So that's what next week is going to talk about. And we're going to connect histamines to PCOS, PMDD, migraine, POTS, MCAS, all of it. So we'll look forward to seeing all of you there. All right, and then I think that is it for today. I'm going to stop the recording. Did that? No, that didn't.